Martin et al. Knew of this paper, or at least they knew of it perhaps when they finished writing their original paper. They were caught short by it. They didn't want to admit that they had been flogging a dead horse. And they sort of mentioned it in a minor paragraph, you know, okay, yes, but where are the traces of Homo floresiensis ancestors coming out of Africa and going into Southeast Asia? Of course, the obvious answer is, where are the ancestors of Homo erectus doing? Because, in fact, almost the whole of Asia, until you get to Southeast Asia and China, are empty of pre-sapiens human fossils. Nobody has looked, or at least nobody has found anything. Okay, who are microcephalics? What does the skull of a microcephalic look like anyway? And here are some specimens from a worldwide sample recently studied, but not yet published, by David Bulbeck and Mark Oxon, two colleagues of mine. And thanks to them for letting me show some of their pics. And they vary very greatly. Extremely small brains are rare. They're usually around the 600 cc mark, so just microcephalic, but some are extremely tiny. And I draw attention to a special sort of microcephalic here, a cretin. Cretins are people suffering from iodine deficiency. The name arises because they were first noticed in the high altitude areas of Switzerland, where the iodine had been eroded out of the soil and water and hence out of the vegetables that they ate, and they were thought to be touched by God. And cretin is a sort of means Christian, essentially. You know, it's a sort of slang for Christian. Anyway, those cretins have very odd teeth and everything is odd about the skulls. And there they are among various other microcephalics. What you see about these microcephalics is that they all of them have Homo sapiens characters, despite their very small brains. They all of them have some chins, and even this one, top, here we are on the right, you see, has virtually a receding chin, and yet it still has, you can just about see there, it has the structure of the modern human chin. And they all have prominent faces and prominent noses. In fact, the more so because the cheekbones are not swept forward by having large brains. And this is unlike Homo floresiensis, even though we don't know exactly how prominent the nose of the Hobbit actually was because of the damage there. Nonetheless, it is true to say that it certainly was not a beaky Homo sapiens-like nose. One of the most famous microcephalics, Bebe. Real name was Nicholas Ferry, and he lived between those dates, in other words, he lived to age 23. He was the firstborn of a peasant family, with a 30-year-old mother. He had an exceptionally small birth weight, so he was what is called a primary microcephalic, that is, developed in the womb, perhaps for genetic reasons, perhaps for nutritional reasons in the womb. At 4, he was adopted by the court of the Duke of Lorraine. You know, he was a sort of funny little thing, the sort of thing that ducal courts like. He could speak, he could never read. He was active and emotional, jealous of his position. He fought with another dwarf who visited the court. He was very, very jealous of this other dwarf. He developed sexually, and as he did so, he became weaker physically. The Duke had him engaged to a dwarf woman. You know, what fun. Make these two dwarfs marry each other. But he died before the marriage could occur. And at death, he was 89 centimeters high, so he was even smaller than Homo floresiensis. His skeleton was normally developed, but he lost all his teeth during his later development. And his cranial capacity, his brain size, was 638 cc's. So although he was actually shorter than the Hobbit, his brain was larger. And there he is, Bebe, his skeleton. And the one on the right is Dave Bulbeck, a perfectly normal individual, at least he tells me so. There is some views of his skull. You see his teeth lost, and he has this porotic hyperostosis, indicative of iron deficiency. And you can can see it disfiguring or sort of marking all the posterior part of his brain case. And we've seen that there is a little on Homo floresiensis, but it's quite common actually in modern humans who have suffered some iron deficiency because of disease or because of nutritional defects during childhood, but they recover perfectly normally, and it doesn't deform the skull. And Henrietta D. Bork, who expanded her sample of microcephalic endocasts, there they are, all underneath the line, and they're all alike. So the idea that Jakob Mergele was an abnormal microcephalic was quite unjustified. And Martin et al. Says that the brain of LV1, there is LV1 top left in red, and the brain especially resembled that of a microcephalic Basuto woman. They found, which is the red here. And here also emphasized is the brain of a 90 centimeter high dwarf woman, which actually is not quite microcephalic, it's above the microcephalic level, it's still pretty small though. And the brain volumes are depicted there, and you can see the microcephalics are all pretty small, except for this dwarf woman. And you can see that LV1, although its brain size is much smaller than modern humans, has shape like modern humans where microcephalics are abnormal. And microcephalics differ from normals in that the frontal lobes at the front of the brains, you see, are smaller, these bits. They're smaller, they're narrower from side to side, they're more beaky than modern humans, in which they're filled out than sort of normal modern humans. The cerebellum extends well down below the cerebrum, and here's the cerebellum at the back. You see it extends down. It's as if, you know, as if the brain is sort of drooped down at the back. Actually, what's happened is that the cerebrum, the main thinking bit, the main doing bit of the brain, has shrunk, leaving the cerebellum behind. And you see, there's no trace of this in LV1, and it's like modern humans. LV1 is perfectly normal in these features. It's not a microcephalic brain. Jakob Mergele's brain is entirely typical of those of microcephalics, as Dean Bork assumed. So why has there been so much, well, skepticism? We won't call it skepticism. These people are pushing a barrel in the main. Well, the great 20th century anatomist said, Sir Wilfrid Le Gros Clark, said, every discovery of a fossil relic which appears to throw light on connecting links in man's ancestry, this is in pre-non-sexist days, always has and always will arouse controversy. For example, when the Neanderthal remains were first discovered in 1857 by Johannes Fuhrer, one Carter Blake said all these characters, I think described the skull, are compatible with the Neanderthal skeleton having belonged to some poor idiot or Homo. Some of these things are very reminiscent of what people like Jakob and Richards say about the whole. And Meyer said the fracture of the thigh bone is not normal and is observable, like the fracture of the tuberosities, the ischial bones, in those who have been riders from their youth up. So he acquired this because he was on horseback from a child. And Meyer said it was the Neanderthal skeleton was the skeleton of a Mongolian Cossack of Chernychev's army chasing the retreating French in 1814. And this Cossack, he says somewhere else, was badly wounded and crawled into a valley and into a cave halfway up the side of the valley to die, wrinkling his brow all the time against the large brow ridges.